This all happened 15 years ago. I was about 19 years old when I was offered a job by my cousin to work for her uncle's glass business. They install giant glass windows into tall buildings and skyscrapers. Not that it's too relevant to the story, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The catch to the job was that I had to temporarily move to Destin, Florida from Tampa. My cousin lived in Russellville, Alabama, and I really wanted to go visit the family there and leave with them together to go back down to Destin. Now, this was my first long-distance road trip, and my very first trip away from my immediate family. Back then, I was driving a green Mercury Sable, a car barely capable of getting groceries back home, but in my invincible youth, I didn't really care about that. I was just so pumped to be spreading my wings and getting out into the real world that the risks didn't really concern me. My mom and dad had tried to get me to plan and pack better, knowing the trip could have its pitfalls. But I mean, it wasn't like the trip was going to last days, and also fast food exists, so I wasn't really stressing out about that. I mean, I'm not stupid. I packed for the trip and I'm going to be staying there for a few months in Destin, but they were really adamant on me bringing food, water, emergency supplies, etc. I declined because it wasn't the 1930s, and of course there's gas stations at every exit, and I had a Razor flip phone. My way of thinking was, what could possibly happen on two busy interstates? It wasn't like I was going to some far-off country with no cell service. Anyways, fast forward to the trip. I'm a Florida boy, so I had no idea Alabama could get so cold, and I also had no idea that the heat was broken in my car. I had never really used it. At first I'm thankful because by the time I reach Alabama, I'm tired as hell, and I had made a lot more stops than I anticipated. I still had a few hours to go, and the cold air was keeping me wide awake. Finally, I pull off the interstate and I start heading through these smaller numbered roads. The roads didn't really have conventional names like in Florida. They were just numbered, which I kind of found odd. After driving on those a bit, I started being sent down gravel roads. This was the days of MapQuest, so I didn't have a GPS guiding me through the just paved roads or rerouting me around roadblocks. I was starting to get really hungry and I thought back to my parents telling me to pack food. I really should have listened. The sketchiest thing with MapQuest was that you just printed out the directions, so you didn't really have a map to fall back on. So going out of your way to find fast food at an exit came with the potential of legitimately getting lost. So I had basically passed a few times to turn off for food because I was tired and I just didn't want to chance it. Instead, however, I was looking for something off the side of the road that I could easily pull in and then back out with no fuss. But more importantly, no risk of getting lost. My prayers were answered a little down the road when I saw a beat-up old country grocery store on my right-hand side. It didn't even have a name. It just said grocery right across the front of the white building. I pulled in because the light shining across the grocery sign was on, but found it odd that most of the lights inside were off. I'm not gonna lie, this gave me the creeps a little, but it didn't stop me from going up to the door. I was really starving and maybe this was a 24-hour place, but I wasn't sure. I saw a shadow move across the back of the long aisles as I approached the glass door and surprisingly opened it with ease. At this point, I was honestly half expecting them to be closed due to the lack of lighting inside, and I was really hoping that the owner would take pity on a tired traveler and let me grab some snacks. I then called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No one answered. I then said something along the lines of, "I saw you when I pulled up, and I was hoping you're still open." Again, no answer. Now, this was really naive of me, but I assumed that maybe the owner was just older or something and maybe he couldn't hear me, or that maybe he was deaf, so I went further back into the store. It honestly didn't really smell that great inside there, and I had hoped that they at least had some chips or something. At least those are sealed. Suddenly a man emerged from the back. "Oh, I'm so sorry, we were just about to close. How can I help you?" he asked with a smile. He clearly made me jump out of my skin at first, but he seemed friendly enough. Not the old man I was picturing before, but actually a much younger guy, maybe in his 30s. "Yeah, I just came up from Florida. It's been a long drive." I was kinda hoping you guys had something to eat for the trip." "Oh, we have plenty. What are you looking for exactly?" he said without taking his eyes off me. The guy had a really weird unblinking stare that just really put me on edge, but what made me the most uncomfortable was his smile. He smiled big, but his eyes never moved, as in the only way you could tell he was conveying an emotion was by looking at his mouth. The rest of his face stayed the same. Most people, you could tell they're smiling even if their mouth was covered, because you smile with your whole face, but not this guy. "Yeah, I just wanted some chips, maybe a Coke. Do you have any Doritos?" "Of course," he said, walking past me. He locked the door behind me before turning and smiling. "I don't want anyone else walking in," he chuckled. Him locking the door was really creepy, but I just shrugged it off because the reasoning was pretty sound, even though it felt off. "Follow me," the guy said as he walked towards the back of the store. I was young, but I really should have been smart enough to know that the store owners generally don't give customers a tour of the store, but I had lived a pretty sheltered life. I could feel that something was off, but I didn't want to offend him by asking questions like, "What's that smell?" and other things. We get to the back of the store to where those plastic flaps hang that separate the customer side and the back end. When the man sticks his hand through, parting through the plastic, then saying, "Right this way." Now alarm bells are starting to go off in my head, especially as he starts looking around and past me like someone who's selling drugs and trying to watch out for the police. Back there?" I ask and start to back up a little. That's when I then notice Chips right beside me on the aisle. The guy noticed me see the chips and then says, "Yeah, back here. We got all our good stuff in the back. You can come take your pick." By this time, I had found the source of the buzzing. Flies are flying over the meat section, and the dim light that's reflecting off the packaging lets me know that it's been sitting there a while. "I'll just take this if that's alright," I say nervously as I grab a bag off the shelf next to me and then start backing up towards the door. "Trust me, those are no good. I have way better stuff back here." He smiles again, gesturing for me to head back. I fake pat my pockets, then saying, "Oh man, I think I forgot my wallet in my car. I'll be right back." As soon as the words left my lips, I then spun around and did a light jog to the front, increasing with speed as I approached the door. I make it to the door and twist the lock a couple times until I hear the click. I push the door open and turn back to look at where the man is, but he's gone. I jumped into that car and sped the fuck out of that parking lot and didn't stop again until I reached my cousin's house.
Sorry, but be prepared for a fairly long story. Here goes. I was living in Hawaii and had to move to LA for work. Didn't know anyone and was fairly broke, and my job wasn't going to help with the moving expenses. So I had to resort to scouring Craigslist for a room to rent. After literally thousands of scams or weirdos, I finally find this amazing girl. She was funny, we had similar interests, and she even worked in the same field as me. She didn't have a place yet, but her and another girl were looking at several houses that required a third roommate. They were totally okay with doing all the work, seeing as how I was an ocean away. She called or Skyped with me about once a week, and sent me pictures of each house they looked at. All in all, she was pretty incredible. Fast forward 3 months. They found a huge and gorgeous house. Everything was settled. The 2 girls, Evan and Juliana, were moved in. And Evan, the original girl from the Craigslist, picked me and all of my stuff up at the airport. On the ride home, she starts telling me horror stories about her past roommates. Every single one had fucked her over in some horrendous way, and she was terrified of being close to people after that. She said she wanted us to be the people who turned that around for her. She wanted us to be like a little family. Instead of going directly to the house, we went to a nearby Starbucks, where she chain smoked and told me about her stepdad who was in AA, and how she'd briefly been attending NA meetings after a short bout with a painkiller addiction. She decided she wasn't a drug addict and didn't need it. Then, she admits that she's only known the other roommate for a month and a half. Red flags are starting to pop up all over the place. Why would an LA native need to find strangers to live with her on Craigslist? Why the oversharing about drugs in her family? Why had she never had a positive roommate experience? Pushed it all aside, giving this girl the benefit of the doubt. A few weeks go by in the house, and all's well. I forget she ever seemed off, and we start becoming closer and closer. She then takes me on a tour of LA for a day, and proceeds to tell me her entire disturbing life story. When I say we gotten close, by no means were we close enough to make this appropriate. She tells me about her stepfather molesting her, getting sent to a mental hospital when she told on him because he's a doctor and she said she was criminally insane, then getting raped by a lesbian at the hospital and beaten by the guards, then attempting suicide, as well as her mother's severe narcotic addiction, her then ex-fiancé having a psychotic break and trying to kill her, her struggles with chronic kidney illness that required many surgeries, her recent long-term boyfriend disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The horrific stories just went on and on and on. It sounded like something from a movie, and part of me questioned if it could all be possibly true. But again, I was giving her the benefit of the doubt. Things go fine for a while, and my doubts about her subside. And my food starts disappearing. I asked both girls about it privately, and Evan claims that the other girl, Juliana, had confessed to her that she was a compulsive overeater. Naturally, Juliana claims to be innocent. I side with Evan, and we start mildly bullying Juliana to try to get her to admit that she was stealing the food. And dishes start piling up in the sink, and nobody is washing them except me. I ask both girls, and again, Evan swears on her life that it's Jules. Finally, Jules has had enough. It turns out she's been eating out every meal. We all had very different schedules, and Evan lied to my face about the dishes and food. When confronted, Evan starts crying and saying, "How could you accuse me of such things? I'm a good person. I'm a good person." We ended up apologizing to her in the end. Finally, tension builds between the two girls due to many repeats of this situation. And one night, when I'm at work and they start fighting, Evan calls me saying that Juliana hit her and she's afraid for her life. I call Jules and tell her to find a new place to live. Juliana goes to stay with friends, and within a week she moves out. Now this is where things get really weird. Evan moves out of the master bedroom and starts sleeping in the living room every single night. After I repeatedly request that she return to living in her own bedroom, she tearfully confesses that she's been on high-dose opiates this whole time. She's trying to wean herself off, but it makes her too weak to walk downstairs. Feeling sorry for her, I end up babysitting her for a few weeks while she withdraws. It was both terrifying and disgusting. I really wanted to help her out. During this time, I see her naked and realize that she has no scars from her quote-unquote repeated surgeries. Beyond that, she confides in me that she hasn't been working at all this entire time, but going out to score drugs and get high every single day. And now, she's flat broke. She apologizes for lying and saying over and over that she's a sick addict and just needs help. I get her into AA and NA as soon as she's able to walk, driving her to her daily meetings and holding her hand the entire time. My longtime boyfriend and her oldest friend move in with us a short while later to help with the bills. That's when it all goes from bad to unbearable. Evan goes to visit her mom one night and disappears for a week, returning very clearly high and claiming to be sober. She then starts going on many trips to visit friends in other states and is rarely home. When she is home, she babbles endlessly about how great sobriety is, and how she's finally healing, while clearly nodding out on opiates. I end up finding something suspicious on her computer, and she openly admits to me that she's been working as a call girl, bringing customers to our house. I tell her this has to stop, and she claims she already has. Around this time, she becomes very physically ill. Finally, I get a phone call from her after another absence. She's hysterical. She's, get this, 6 months pregnant. She didn't know because she was so high. The baby was severely malformed and there was no way of carrying it to term. I tried comforting her. thinking that this trauma outweighed all the weird behaviors she's exhibited. She had the procedure and afterwards disappeared for almost a month. I thought at one point she was dead until she texted me asking if her cat was okay. When she returned, she proceeded to start eating all of our food, using all of our toiletries, sleeping on the couch, and smoking inside the house, which was not okay with us at all. She was very clearly on drugs again. At first, we tried to be nice about it, but she lied and lied and lied, even going so far to say her room was haunted and the ghost made her sleep upstairs. Finally, my boyfriend snaps and yells at her. She calls the cops and claims he assaulted her. They didn't believe her, but the other roommate did. Then one night when I'm at home, she uses pity and sweet talking to convince my boyfriend that we should all be friends again. I told him it was a lie, and he didn't believe me. When I get home from work that same night, my room is trashed. I asked if he did it, and of course, he claimed he didn't. She'd been in there looking for cash or drugs, which I don't do. When I asked her about it, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "It was a ghost." After that, she started sending me insane emails, claiming that I'd been her best friend and betrayed her, accusing her of heinous crimes, and even convincing her that she was a drug addict as a form of a sick psychological torture. The emails get increasingly intense, becoming 10 to 20 pages about how she didn't feel safe in her own home, and how I was the embodiment of pure evil, and that my only purpose in life was to torment her. In these emails, she claimed that she used drugs on rare occasion, and that I'd made everything about her problems up, and that I'd been verbally abusive about her abortion, and that we had repeatedly physically assaulted her. We were genuinely afraid for our safety, especially after the police showed up one day and took her in for a mysterious psychiatric hold. We never found out why she was carried out of the house, barefoot and handcuffed by 4 LAPD officers. After that, we just tried to avoid her, but she got that other roommate involved again. She went as far as to claim that she had pneumonia from the stress of living with us, and our constant abuse. The emails continued to escalate. At one point, she said that I had been a sister to her, until the evil spirit in me had forced me to abuse her. This was when I realized that her definition of abuse was a bit skewed, and all her stories about her childhood, exes, old roommates, and even Juliana had been complete fabrications. Of course, she didn't have scars from the surgeries. Everything she said was a lie, just to garner sympathy so she could take advantage of people. Now, I realized this, of course, finally, and that she was completely mad. We found a new house, and the night before moving out, I hacked into her email. Come to find out, she had been telling our landlord that we were heinous criminals, telling her parents that she had been fired from a job because of me and needed money. All kinds of lies. Also, we came to find out that the guy who gotten her pregnant didn't mysteriously disappear. He ran away because they slept together once and she started stalking him. Obviously, everything she had ever said was a creepy little lie. After moving out, the harassing emails and texts continued to the point that I have her blocked on both and seriously consider getting a restraining order. This was 2 years ago. Last month, we found out this girl who had claimed to have never been a drug addict, and then I made all of it up and died of an OD. She was evil. This wasn't a situation where nobody tried to help a sick person. Everyone around her tried to help her, and she manipulated and used every single one of them. I don't feel sad that she's gone. In fact, I still want to punch her in the face. TLDR, my roommate decided to be a drug-addicted, lying, stealing sociopathic prostitute who semi-stalked me via email and text.
I worked as a Walmart cashier for a little over a year. I quit in August of 2015 when I went away to college. As a cashier, you see a lot of people in a day, especially at Walmart. And after a while, you don't even see people's faces when you look at them, but there are some people that you see so often you start to recognize and sometimes learn their names. There was this one guy, always in the same Green Bay Packers hoodie and Chicago Cubs baseball cap, that would often seek out my line no matter how long it was, just so he could stare at me and rarely say a word. Whenever he did say anything to me, he would always lean across the register to get closer to my face. He always gave me a really bad vibe,
but when I asked other cashiers about him, they said that he had never been weird around them. One of the girls even said he was a close family friend. After that, I dropped the issue. One night after I'd been there for about a year, I was working a 2 to 11 shift. Those shifts were always the worst because you'd be there for 3, sometimes 4 front-end managers, but also because it takes the chunk out of your day when you were actually going to do anything. So I'm down on the self-checkout. It's about 10:15, so I'm counting the minutes until I can shut it down at 10 to 11. The creepy guy comes in the front door and makes a beeline for me at the self-check podium. When I see him come in, I instantly get nervous. He walks up and says, "Can I still buy a cell phone card and electronics?" I told him I only worked as a cashier on the front end, so I didn't know anything about electronics, but he could go back and check. He seemed peeved by this answer, but he walked away without another word. About 10 minutes later, he comes up with a prepaid phone card and said there's no one at the register in electronics, so I activate his card and hand it to him, telling him to have a good night, but he pushes the card back at me without saying a word, and I say, "Is something wrong?" To which he replies, "These minutes aren't on my phone yet, are they?" I was confused by this statement because, of course, they weren't. He had just bought the card. I shook my head, and he waved the card in front of my face. "Why the fuck are you just standing there? Reactivate my phone." When he talked, he was so close I could smell his breath, and I was a little scared. I wanted to put in a call to my manager so that someone could come down and help me. This is where I should probably mention that I'm about 5'3", and he is closer to probably 6'5", and very stocky, so he was towering over me, and the thought that he could easily overpower me crossed my mind, but I get so nervous whenever men yell or cuss at me because my dad was never the type to yell or cuss. I took the card out of his hand and he slammed his cell phone on the scanner. I was trying not to let him know I was nervous, but I was terrified. I knew I had never put minutes on a prepaid phone before, but I don't dare tell him that in fear of what he might do. So I read the directions, pick up his phone, dial the number, and as I'm putting in the card number, his phone runs out of minutes. I try to call back and get an error message. I'm at a loss. I meekly hand him his phone back and say, "I'm sorry, something went wrong. I don't know what is happening." As soon as I say it, he takes his phone, opens it up, tries to dial someone, and when it doesn't work, he looks at me with furious eyes. He screams, "What the fuck did you do to my phone? What the fuck?" His voice is echoing in the store, and unfortunately we haven't gotten the end of second shift rush yet, so there is no one around. He closes his phone and opens it again, trying to make another call, but when it doesn't work, he throws the phone down on the scanner again. He says, "I don't know what you did with my phone, but you better fucking fix it." But this comes much more quietly, practically a whisper. At this point, I'm worried he's going to put his hands on me, and I don't know what to do. I put in a call for a manager from my register, and then I say, "I've called someone that might be able to help, but we're at shift change right now, so it might be faster for you to take it to the customer service desk." He picks up his phone off the podium, still mumbling under his breath that I fucked up his phone, and I'm hoping I can get out of there before he comes back, or at least have someone else down at the self-check with me. Another 15 minutes go by, and I don't see him again. As I'm picking up items that people left by the registers, getting ready to shut them down for the night, he comes back and stands by the podium. He still looks completely pissed off, and my stomach has sank. He made that finger motion that means come here without saying anything, and for some reason that makes me even more nervous. When I'm standing in front of him, he leans so close to my face that I think he's about to kiss me or bite me or God knows what. I try to take a step back, but he takes a step forward when I do. A creepy grin comes across his face as he says, "The girl up there fixed it. Simple fix. But next time, I expect you to know what to do. Understand?" I nod because I don't think I can speak. He gets impossibly closer before saying, "I'm sorry I raised my voice. I never should have done that, especially to a pretty girl like you." When he adds the last part, he lightly uses his fingertips to brush my bangs to the side. I took a step back and he said, "Let me make it up to you. Let me buy you a drink." I shake my head. I say, "No, thank you. I'm only 19. He says, "So we'll get a couple of beers and go back to my place." Again, I shake my head. "No, it's really okay. I'm not much of a drinker. I have an early morning tomorrow." He looks displeased with this answer and says, "Tell you what, I'll wait over here by the door just in case you change your mind." I smile at him weakly and tell him to have a good night. When I see him walk through the security, I quickly shut down the registers and sign out of mine. Then I run over to find a manager to tell about the whole thing. The third shift manager that I tell looks at me like I'm lying, and when I'm finished says, "I know Todd. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He doesn't have it in him. You're probably just being dramatic." She then turns to another older cashier behind her, shakes her head and mumbles, "Teenagers." I ask if I can have someone to walk me to my car, and they tell me that management is in a meeting and the security guy went home already. So I clocked out and went to the bathroom. I waited in the bathroom for about 10 minutes before coming out and attempting to go to my car. When I walked around the corner through the security things, he wasn't sitting on the bench right there like I had been expecting. I relaxed a little before I realized he was standing just outside the door, far enough away to keep it from closing, smoking a cigarette. He has his back turned toward the door. Luckily, I never went out the front doors. I always went to the corridor and not the side door. I quietly closed the door behind me so maybe I wouldn't catch his attention. I rushed to my car, which was fortunately very close to the building. As I'm quick walking to my car, I hear him shout, "Hey, why are you avoiding me? Come here." At this point, I take off into a full-on sprint, which is not easy because I'm wearing Sperry's, so it's like running in clogs. I get to my car, get in, lock my doors as I'm starting it, and don't even bother with my seatbelt. By that point, he had made it almost all the way to my car and was still yelling, telling me he just wanted to talk. I took off as fast as I could and took the longest way home with the most turns and twists that I could. When I got home, I told my dad about the experience, and he was so angry that no one had answered my calls or believed me. He called the store manager the next day and complained. I was never contacted about his complaint, but from that night on, whenever I saw that guy, I would run to the bathroom, or if I couldn't get away, I would put out my lane closed sign and turn off my light so he couldn't get in my line. And you always hear people talking about the people of Walmart as being trashy, but they never tell you about the select few that are scary as hell.
Okay guys, yesterday was probably one of the worst days I've ever endured, and it all started with a phone call at about 7 a.m. I picked up my phone to see who was calling me so early, but since I didn't recognize the number, I just put it on silent and fell back asleep. When I woke up again 3 hours later, I saw that I had 12 missed calls and 8 new voicemails. Panic started to set in as I thought something horrible had happened to one of my family members. As I looked through all the missed numbers though, I realized that I didn't know who any of these people were. I thought that was really strange, since if something bad had happened to a family member, I should at least recognize one of these numbers. Things got weirder as I heard the first voicemail.
"Hi, I was just giving you a call about the house you have for sale. I saw the Craigslist ad and was hoping to figure out a time I could be given a walkthrough. Just give me a call back, thanks."
I figured that was the wrong number and played the next one.
"Yeah, hi. I was calling about the house for sale on Craigslist. If you could, give me a call back. I'd really like to know some more stuff about those murders before I take a walkthrough. Thanks, and have a nice day."
After hearing the second voicemail, I was really starting to wonder what the hell is going on here. The other 6 voicemails were all pretty much the same thing, inquiring about setting up a walkthrough and wanting to know about these quote-unquote murders. After I finished listening to the last one, I needed to find out what the fuck is going on. I called the last number to leave a voicemail, and a woman answered. When I asked her about the house she was calling about, she said there was an ad on Craigslist offering a house for dirt cheap, but it was only so cheap because the post said that a couple had been murdered inside the house.
I asked her if she could text me the link, and she assured me that she would. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed and I saw her number pop up on its screen. I had no idea what I was in store for by clicking on that link. So when the webpage opened, the coldest chill I've ever felt shot down my spine. I saw a picture of my house on Craigslist for sale. What made it worse was it was the picture that had been taken within the last week. You could see the pumpkin that I carved last weekend. And then I read the posting description. I have this sweet little home that I'm putting up for sale. It's located in this town. Just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the city. Enjoy all the seclusion and privacy that this house will bring you. My asking price is $25,000. Disclosure: there is a reason I'm asking basically nothing for my house. The previous couple who lived there, a young man and a woman, were murdered in the house about a year ago. I figured it would get out in the open now so that I'm only contacted by people who are not bothered by this. Don't let this little mishap dissuade you though. The neighborhood is very safe. I promise. You can call. Then they listed my name and number at any time, day or night. I never sleep. And we can set a time to take a walkthrough of my house. I look forward to hearing from you soon. With a winky face. I felt like I'd been socked in the gut. What the fuck is going on? How did they know my number, my name? I immediately called my girlfriend over to see. I could see the horror set in on her face as she looked through the ad. I don't think I could feel any worse until she pointed out how our car was in the picture. We were in the house when someone took these pictures. I immediately called the police to figure out what the hell to do. They informed me that I should immediately contact Craigslist to remove the posting. Other than that, there was nothing really we could do at the moment. The only crime that had technically been committed would be trespassing, but since whoever took that picture wasn't on our property anymore, they really couldn't do anything else. I'm freaking the hell out. My girlfriend was on the phone with her mom in hysterics for most of the day yesterday. Today, we've just been on constant alert. Every sound we hear makes us jump. I think the worst part is, I know there's really nothing I can do. I feel so violated, and so completely helpless.
This happened about 4 years ago. I was 20 years old at the time. The first time I met the guy who would become my grocery store stalker, he was standing outside the store collecting money for the Salvation Army's Christmas time donations. I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places I frequent just to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall, with a mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family. Dark circles under dark eyes, short black hair, and a kind of vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe about 2 minutes, kind of just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot. Nothing particularly memorable or interesting. I then waved goodbye and went home. Little did I know that that single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed and I hadn't seen him again. Then one day as I was grocery shopping with a friend, when, as we were chatting, she suddenly got really quiet and kind of recoiled backwards, then looking behind me. I turned around to see this guy who had to be at least 6'4" towering over me, not 8 inches from my body. He said hi and he told me that he remembered from that December that I had talked to him, and then asked for my number. I, being young and had never really experienced this type of interaction before, told him that I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and then maybe text him later. I kinda half-waved my phone at him, pointing at my at-the-time boyfriend, whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," to the guy, hoping he would clue in. But no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting, I blocked, without letting him get my number. However, what really made my blood run cold was what he said to me after I put my phone away. He leaned in real close to me and in a really low voice, then told me, "Whatever I text you is for your eyes only." I start to feel genuinely uncomfortable at this point. I said back, yeah, sure. It was nice talking to you, but we gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking her why she didn't bail me out. Apparently he scared her too with him getting so close to me, and she just didn't know what to do. I also want to make it clear that I'm not exactly a small girl. I'm 5'8" and solidly built. I can certainly handle myself. and I very rarely ever feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female. But this guy, he really made me feel tiny and scared. In the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had really hoped that that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. After that initial meeting with him saying that creepy thing about his text being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time that I got into the store. No matter what checkout lane I was in, he always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finished shopping, and every time I was in the store, I would always notice him out of the corner of my eye watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time I even caught him following me out to my car. At that point I got scared and I finally decided to say something to the managers. After letting all the managers know what was going on, they then assured me that they would tell him not to talk to me. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance every single time I went up there. It got so bad and I felt so terrified that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I'm one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to the point where I'll stop doing something. I had really hoped that maybe it was just a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a really big store, and maybe he just had things to do that just happened to be in the same areas I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started really paying attention, I realized that every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the same areas in the store that I was in. During my last encounter with him, I had went to the store to just grab 2 or 3 items that I needed for dinner that night, and I first saw him standing at the store when I got there, and with his back facing me, I quickly ran inside, hoping he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I had saw him at the very back of the store, and items in hand, I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if the creepy guy would appear. I watched as he looked up and down at the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step outside. At this point, I quickly ran to the nearest open cashier, rang up all my items, and then stuck my head out the door to look for him. I didn't see him there immediately, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. I had parked a little ways away near the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up at, and I was walking towards my car. I realized then that I saw him standing by the entrance that I had first entered the store through, and then dug behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store, and so I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car as soon as that he was far enough away that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I then locked the doors, and to my horror when I looked up, he was standing there about 15 feet from my car with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew that he followed me, and he knew that I knew. I fully believed that he had chased after me, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest cart to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and I immediately told my grandfather what had just happened. I began crying and shaking, and my grandfather told me to get in the car. We were going to settle this. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me into the store and demanded we spoke with the managers immediately, both of them. When the managers arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell them what had been happening and demanded that they ensure he left me alone or that he would involve the police. The managers swore up and down they would take care of it. As far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself, but that any time I went with her, she would never see him. I fully believed that he knew whenever I was there, only this time instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I've never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day, seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot as I locked my car doors. It still really creeps me out to think that he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted. So yeah, I was stalked every time I went grocery shopping for 4 months straight, and I never want to experience that ever again.
A couple of years ago, I responded to a Craigslist ad for a TV. I was in the market for a new one after mine broke, and unfortunately, I hadn't gotten the warranty for it. I searched on Craigslist because I figured that's where the best deals would be. People on Craigslist are generally just trying to get rid of stuff, and will sell it somewhere else if they want more money. That's what I was thinking, so after searching for a while, I found a TV that looked good. It was 55 inches, relatively new, and was a good price. Not so cheap that it looked like a scam, but cheap enough that it was a really good deal. I saw that it was a new listing, and I decided to contact the seller immediately so that nobody else would get it before I had a chance to. The seller responded to me rather quickly, and I asked to look at the TV. I had the money and was prepared to buy it as long as it worked and everything, but my main problem was how I would bring it back to my place. My car was really small, and there was no way I was going to fit it in there. My buddy Danny had a truck that it would fit in, so I texted him and asked him if he would help me out. Meanwhile, I was told that I would be able to see the TV that day at 3 p.m., and I agreed to go see it. My hope was that Danny would be able to possibly meet me there with his truck, but a few minutes later, he wasn't responding to my text. I had to leave, and I drove to the location I was given to. It was about 15 minutes away from where I lived. I got to the neighborhood, which looked pretty average to me. It was a residential area that was a little bit out in the country, but not too much. Most houses were decently spread apart with larger yards and a decent amount of trees around. I arrived at the address and parked on the side of the street in front of it. It was a nice-looking house with a long driveway. They had some nice decorations outside and a garden in the front yard. I texted the seller letting him know that I was there, and he told me to come up to the front door. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway, then knocked on the front door. A man answered and said his name was Dave. Dave had gray hair and a gray goatee. He was maybe in his 50s or 60s. He told me he was selling the TV because his son gave him one, and he just wanted to get rid of this one now because he didn't need it. He then told me that he had some other people interested, so he hoped I would be able to buy it. After I saw the TV sitting in his living room and we turned it on, I told him yes, I would like to buy it, but I wouldn't be able to drive it to my place. I explained how I texted my friend, and then I checked to see if Danny had gotten back to me. He had, but he said he wouldn't be able to help me until tonight. I asked the man if there was any chance he would be able to hold the TV for me just until 8 p.m. when I would be back. I was surprised, but the man agreed, but he said he wouldn't hold it any longer. I left and went back home, and when Danny came by with his truck that night, I texted Dave, the seller, and he said it was fine for me to come and buy the TV now. Danny and I drove back to Dave's place, now at nighttime. When we arrived at the neighborhood and made our way to the address, I got confused. Dave's house looked different. All of the lights were off, the yard decorations were gone, and even the flowers were gone. It looked as though it was a completely different place than a few hours earlier. Danny shut his engine off and had already gotten out of the truck. I got out and told him to wait because it just didn't look right. Danny was confused and asked why as he began to walk up the driveway. I told him how it looked like nobody lived there now, and he did agree that it seemed creepy. I called Dave to let him know that I was there now, but after I called him, there was no answer. I texted him as well, but I couldn't get a response. We got back in the truck and sat in there waiting for about 15 minutes, but I didn't get any responses from Dave. I figured maybe he sold it to somebody else after all or something, and we decided we should just go back home. I was frustrated, and I was also really weirded out by the whole situation. That night, I was awoken in the middle of the night to my phone ringing. I picked it up and saw that Dave was calling me. It was almost 4 a.m. I decided to answer it because I was really curious why he was calling me now. When I picked up, I could hear Dave's voice start to speak, but I couldn't make out anything that he was saying. He then began to laugh like a maniac, and it really gave me the creeps. His laughing got louder and louder, and then he hung up. It took me a while to get back to sleep, but I was so creeped out by the whole situation that the next day I drove all the way back to the neighborhood. I knocked on Dave's door, but nobody answered. The house still looked abandoned, so I went to the neighbor across the street and knocked on his door and asked him if he knew the guy who lived there. He told me that nobody currently lived in that house and hadn't for a couple of weeks. After learning this, I went back to Craigslist and found that the listing had been deleted. I also looked at my phone and tried to call and text Dave again, but my number was now blocked.
Okay, so this might sound like a bit of a weird one, because not like a spooky story. Our Airbnb wasn't haunted or anything, and I don't believe in stuff like that to begin with. But when me and my girlfriend stayed at an Airbnb in Belgium, something happened that creeped us out so much that we had no choice but to leave the apartment and check into a hotel. I've had a mate of mine tell me I overreacted over this, but just put yourself in my shoes. First proper morning of our little weekend getaway to Bruges. Me and the old ball and chain are getting ready to go out for breakfast when we realized that neither of us had packed any toothpaste. It was one of those I figured you'd do it kind of things. But it was no big drama since we could just brush our teeth and help ourselves to sketchy mints the owners had left for us. But I do remember my girlfriend looking around in the bathroom just in case the owner had left us any and saying some throwaway thing like, "I wish they'd left us some toothpaste." Boring, I know. I'll get to the point. We go after breakfast, have a wander around Bruges, grab some toothpaste, then head back to the Airbnb. That night, I go to take a shower before bed and saw that my girlfriend had picked up the weirdest toothpaste that I've ever come across in my entire life. Honest to God, it looked like something you'd get out of a Second World War ration pack with this eye-watering old-fashioned menthol smell to it. I have my shower, walk back into the bedroom where my girlfriend is half asleep, and I kinda poke fun at her for buying vintage toothpaste. She's knackered and half asleep like, "What are you on about?" telling me to shut up and go to sleep, etc., etc. I had a wee giggle to myself, then got into bed and tried to get some sleep. It was the weirdest thing because how did she not realize she'd picked up such weird old toothpaste? And that's when it hit me. She didn't. She didn't realize because she didn't buy it, which means someone else bought it and then put it in our room, which meant that someone was listening to my girlfriend when she was in the bathroom. And it's not like the place was small, and the bathroom was near the front door to the apartment or something. God forgive anyone who wake up my missus in the middle of the night, but I decided the circumstances warranted waking her up. She was annoyed at first, telling me to leave her alone, but once I explained the situation, she just sat up rigid in bed, like completely freaked out. We racked our brains as to how someone might have heard us, but couldn't come up with anything. Like I said, the place wasn't small and the walls were pretty thick. So how had someone heard us? The landlord lived miles away, and as far as we knew, no one else had keys. It's something that bothers me to this day, to be honest. But I still can't work out how someone heard us. And I did ask the landlord about it, who told me no one had been in the apartment. We were convinced it was him, though, enough to just pack our stuff and leave. I know he hadn't exactly brandished a knife at us or anything. What happened would most likely make for a terrible horror movie, but like I said before, put yourself in my shoes. Someone is listening to you when you go to the toilet, and for all you know, they're watching you too. And God knows why they're doing it, but it can't be a good wholesome reason. 1,000 nopes, seriously. Just thinking it over had me and my girlfriend getting out of there. It didn't ruin the trip too much. Like we realized early what was going on, so I think we got off quite lightly. The extra hotel money was the real scary part, though.
Okay, so I've posted this on a sub before, and I was just thinking about creepy encounters I had. And it struck me that this one probably qualifies as kind of creepy. Hopefully I'm right. This happened about a year ago now. College student, and I was basically forced to move out on my own, which I didn't mind. That meant finding a new roommate, which can be daunting and a scary experience. I've had a few weird encounters, but I think this one takes the cake. I posted on Craigslist looking for a bedroom in a shared house or apartment for $300 or less. And on my ad I mentioned, please no phone calls, only text or email. Because I find being on the phone with someone I hadn't had a chance to size up a really uncomfortable situation. Just awkward, I guess. Anyway, I get a call from a dude who clearly didn't read the no calls part, which I mentioned because this type of phone call was exactly the reason I don't like to talk to strangers on the phone. At first he was just pleasant and normal. Told me he had a room available and relevant information like that. We started to talk about when and where we'd like to meet, and he started going on tangents about random things. A combination of interested and deep conversation, and too awkward to end a call when it starts to get kind of weird. So this call went on for 2 hours. We talked about the meaning of life and all kinds of weird shit. Honestly, this should have been the red flag. I shouldn't have met with him. Of course, I also should have grown a pair and told him I needed to leave. So, he wants me to meet him at his place and show me the room. Since learned that you should really insist on meeting in a public place first. I get to his neighborhood, and it was run down on a level that made the ghetto I grew up in look nice. Saggy front porches, hot cracked concrete, sad people with old beat up Lincolns. You get the picture. His house blended right in. The yard was seriously overgrown and the front door didn't work. So I went around the back and just looked at the guy standing in the doorway. Seeing the kitchen behind him was enough to make me realize that I really just wanted to leave. No way in hell. The guy in the doorway was a man with a sort of clown-style afro. He was leaning on a cane on his right side. His eyes looked crazy, and the house smelled musty from 10 feet away. Again, I'm a coward, so instead of trusting my gut, I go inside this house, and I'm polite, thinking, it's okay. It'll be over in 20 minutes, and then I can get the fuck out. I don't know what made me think this man, who had a 2-hour conversation with me on the phone about life and philosophy, would let me get away that easily. He took me up a flight of creaky steps into a small bedroom with no door and a mattress on the floor. I thought, no way in hell would I live with a 40-something-year-old man, and I was a 19 and a female, with no door on my bedroom. But it was a moot point because my mind was made up before I even saw the room. I wouldn't have lived there for free, let alone $200 a month. Things got weird. He tried to hold me hostage with conversation again. I think he was lonely. He talked about how some of his family were millionaires. He might have been delusional. The whole story seemed made up. He told me about an 18-year-old girl that has also checked out the room and tried to fuck him. And told me about how his mom hated white people. He was black and I was white. It sounded like he sympathized with her. Obviously, that made me even more uncomfortable. Eventually, I was able to find a break in the conversation, plucked up the courage to make up an excuse and leave. I was never so happy to leave a place in my life. I don't know that he was necessarily a rapist or anything like that, but he really gave me the fucking creeps.
A couple of years ago, I traveled to a city for a prospective job. I had a potential job offer and was going to stay a total of 2 days to look at the area in case I were to move there. I didn't really spend a whole lot of time looking for where to stay. I kind of just went onto the Airbnb app, found a place that looked good, and then went for it. I do remember, though, that the owner seemed like a really nice guy. When I arrived, the place itself was decent. It was a little place right by the city. I got the keys and got inside to drop off my stuff. After that, I went out for a few hours and then returned that night. I went to bed that night pretty early. I've always been kind of an early bird and I'm used to it. However, I woke up in seemingly the middle of the night, which is unusual. When I woke up, I looked around confused after seeing it was still dark outside and clearly nighttime. I looked at the clock to see that it was 2:30 a.m. and I remember, just as I was looking at the clock, I heard the sound of the front door to the house being opened. The house had been completely silent, and hearing that was a scary moment. I knew nobody else was supposed to be in the house. I'm not really sure what I was thinking. Maybe it was because I had just woken up and wasn't thinking clearly, but I grabbed the blankets and covered myself with them like a little kid. I then heard footsteps starting to come closer to the bedroom that I was in. My heart started to race like crazy, and I was terrified. I sort of came to my senses and knew that hiding under the covers was a bad idea, but what could I do? I had no time to prepare for this. As the footsteps got closer, it was clear to me that they would likely come in the bedroom. The only thing I thought to do was pretend to still be asleep. Maybe, just maybe, if somebody was going to rob the house or something like that, if they saw that I was fast asleep, they would just ignore me. I also felt this was my only option, because I had no time to run to the closet and hide, or grab something to use as a weapon. I didn't even have time to dial 911, as my phone was charging on the desk, not within my reach. Once whoever was there reached the door, I heard it open, and I closed my eyes and pretended to be sound asleep. I heard whoever was there take 2 steps inside the room or so, and then they just stopped. I didn't hear any more noises or movement for about a whole minute. Very carefully, I opened my eyes just a crack, I was careful to make it look like they were still closed, but I wanted to see whoever was in there. As soon as my eyes cracked open, I saw somebody standing right in front of the doorway, facing me. I looked at them for a couple of seconds. Then I recognized them. It was the man who owned the Airbnb. I remembered him from his picture. He was just standing there staring at me, with no expression on his face. I was careful to close my eyes without making it look like they had ever been open. I was terrified and also very confused as to what he was doing here. He stayed there for probably 5 more minutes and didn't move. It felt like forever, and I was just waiting for him to do something. Finally, I heard him turn around and then walk away. I laid in bed, listening carefully to wherever the man moved throughout the house. He went straight for the door and then just left. After that, I stayed up for about 2 more hours before I could get back to sleep. Luckily, the guy never returned. The next day, I contacted the owner of the Airbnb and asked him what he was doing in the house during the night. He denied being there completely. I reported him after that and did not return back. That was the last time I used Airbnb.
I used to work as an event coordinator at the Swan and Dolphin Resort/Convention Center. Sometimes we'd have to get there at really early hours of the day before the union laborers showed up. This was to get everything ready and set up for special events and stuff like that. One day, one of my managers had cut my hours due to a budget decline in the company. This resulted in me not making as much money as I used to, which caused me to fall behind on rent. Therefore, I had to start making some money until I could either get more hours or find a new job. Eventually, I began to sell some items on sites like Craigslist and eBay, which added to my income. It wasn't much, but it was enough to financially support myself through this time. At the time, I was in the process of selling a specific type of radio from the 40s that was worth a pretty penny. It was my grandpa's radio, and I guess it somehow got passed on to me after he died. I've gotten several offers for it, but the majority of them were people trying to lowball me for prices too small. At one point, however, I get a message from a guy who seemed really interested in it, who was willing to offer me $500 for it, which was more than the listed price. I of course accepted the offer, and he then told me that he could come after 5 after he got off work. This was actually better for me, as I'd be out until 4. Anyway, 5 p.m. rolls around, and a few minutes after, I get a knock at the door and open it. Standing at my doorstep is an older-looking man, maybe late 50s, tall, with a long gray beard. To describe him a little better, he looked like a biker you'd commonly see in country movies. In a very deep and raspy voice, he says, "Hey there, I'm here for that radio?" I happily let him in and show him the radio sitting on the kitchen table, and even got him a snack. Oddly enough, he immediately begins inspecting the condition of it, and even went as far as checking the inside. After what felt like forever, he puts it down and says he'd do it for $300 as the condition wasn't the best. Needless to say, of course, that $500 deal was out the window. He then stares at me with this intimidating look where I felt like I didn't have a choice. In the end, I had to agree and did the deal with him right then. Mind you, I'm a petite 5'7" girl, so I wasn't going to try and argue with someone like him. He gives me the money, puts the radio in his car, thanks me, and drives off. I wasn't sure why, but something about him just gave off a negative vibe, which made me glad he was gone. The rest of the night was normal, where I had been watching a movie in my bed when my phone rang. The call was coming from an unknown number, but the area code was the same. Without thinking much of it, I pick up and immediately recognize the voice on the other end. It was the man from earlier calling me to thank me. What he said, however, will forever be burned into the back of my mind. Hey Sally, look, thank you so much for your hospitality and kindness. If I'm being completely honest with you, I was planning to kill you with a knife I had in my back pocket the second I walked into your house. But you were just so kind, I just couldn't pull myself to do it. Take care now. Right then, my mouth draped open as humanly possible with all these thoughts racing through my mind. If I'm being honest with you, I wasn't sure what to do other than to process as to what I just heard. I would have called the police, but I later found out that the number he was using was fake from an app. That basically meant that even if police were to track the number, it wouldn't lead to him. After that, I removed the listing from Craigslist and never touched the site again. As scary as this was, I never received any updates on his identity or if he's in jail or not. There are seriously some crazy people out in the world who are willing to do anything to you. I emphasize that you please be careful when selling or buying something from sites like Craigslist. You never know who's out there and what they're capable of. This happened when I was in my mid-20s back in 2012 when I was living in Sarasota, Florida. I had just graduated from college and had gotten a job in IT as a software engineer at a really good company. Because of this job, I was able to move out of my parents' house and get an apartment. It wasn't big, but it was spacious enough where I could store most of my stuff. When moving out, odds are you'd probably have a few items left over that you no longer needed or wanted. Well, I had the same situation and had some things I didn't need that I put up for sale on Craigslist. At the time, Craigslist was booming in popularity where people were buying and selling left and right. One of the items I had listed was this large tote I had used back when I played sports. It was in pretty good condition, and I figured I'd snag a deal on it since sports were popular in my town. I'd say within a day, I had gotten a message from someone nearby interested in the tote. He seemed nice, didn't live too far, and was willing to pay more than what I was listing it for. Being so close to me, he'd offered to just meet me at my apartment, which would make for a smoother transaction. I'll be honest, I was a little uncomfortable, knowing that him, a complete stranger, would know where I lived. That being said, I brushed it off and told him I'd do it. Later that night, I hear a knock at the door and was greeted to a man who looked to be in his mid-30s with this Swedish accent. He immediately goes to hug me, telling me that it was a nice way of saying hello in Sweden. Being a gay guy, I didn't really mind it and thought it was a kind gesture. He hugs me for a good 10 seconds before letting go and asking me for the tote. I gladly give it to him, and he then proceeds to pull out a $100 bill and hands it to me, making sure our hands touched. It was a little uncomfortable, but I dismissed it as something people always did in Sweden. He thanks me, hugs me again, and walks down the hallway to the exit. Now let's fast forward till about 2 days later. I happened to be sick on this day and had called off work to rest. As I'm taking a nap in my room, I hear a heavy knocking on my door, which abruptly awoke me. I opened the door and was greeted to 2 police officers and the property manager. Confused, I asked what was going on, to which they then asked if I knew this person. The property manager showed me a photo of a man on his phone who just so happened to be the guy I had sold the tote to. I tell them yes and explain that I had sold him a bag, but that was all I ever knew about him. They take down my name, my description of him, and what he ever said to me or did to me. Whenever I asked why they needed that information, they informed me that they couldn't tell me as of now. That being said, they leave, and it wasn't until a few days later where I had finally gotten my answer. Turns out, the man I had sold the bag to had been wanted for owning 23 terabytes of CP. To put that in perspective, a single terabyte is equivalent to 1,000 gigabytes. This meant that he had about 13,000 hours of content downloaded. When I was told this, I was beyond disgusted, knowing I was talking to a predator, a wanted predator in my home. The tote I had sold him was to keep certain documents that contained information on how to cover his tracks. Obviously, this plan never went through, as he did end up getting caught in the end. I was interviewed for about a week by police before my complete shock slowly got back to normal. After that, I deleted my entire Craigslist account and decided to not sell anything else. Anyway, that's my story, and I hope you can take this as a learning opportunity to never trust people online.
This happened when I was 7 years old with my twin sister and mother. We had just entered our local grocery store, Surefine, when a man no more than 10 feet in front of us glanced over and immediately whipped his head back towards us. Now, as a quick side note, my twin and I at that age were always dressed in matching dresses, and we had long blonde hair that had always got us looks of awe and affection. But this was different. He was a bulky middle-aged man of Mid-Eastern descent, and had stopped what he was doing to fully look at us up and down. A really husky smile crossed his scruffy face. My mother paid no mind to this, as she was no stranger to creepy men herself. I immediately grumbled to my twin Cass how creepy it was the way the man was looking at us. So as we turned left to start going through the aisles, Cass and I turned and we saw the man walking toward us with his shopping cart. When we first made eye contact, he immediately turned his attention to a table with baked goods on it, which kinda stood out to Cass and I more than if he had just kept walking normally. So my mother's obviously shopping, and Cass and I just keep glancing back, and we keep catching the man at the end of every aisle that we enter, just staring with no expression on his face, and even from a slight distance, he was seemingly breathing like really weirdly. I also noticed that his cart continues to remain empty, except for the baked goods that he grabbed when we had first looked back at him. We tell my mother, but she just rolls her eyes at us and tells us that he probably thinks we're following him because we keep looking at him. The man disappears as we hit the last of the aisles, and Cass and I are already on a completely different topic by now, when we're heading for the registers, having almost completely forgotten about him within minutes. We're about to make it to the register when my sister asks my mom for a candy bar, and I quickly join, to which she then angrily replies that we don't have the money for it. We're both pouting at this point, and she threatens to leave us as she begins putting things on the conveyor belt. But then Cass and I watch my mother turn to face us again, when her expression completely changes and her eyes shift behind us. It's the man. He's sweating profusely at this point, and he's literally less than like a foot behind us. Cass and I immediately take a step forward towards our mother. The man laughs awkwardly, then apologizes, saying,
"Sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to scare you girls. You're all just so beautiful. These girls, are they yours?"
My mother kind of scoffs to this and then goes, "Yeah, they're mine." And he does that same awkward laugh again, then saying,
"I couldn't help but notice that you don't have the money to get them what they want. How old are they, and you as well? I could help you. I have lots of money. Money's no problem for me."
My mother's face then furrows in confusion and annoyance, then snapping, excuse me?" Like clockwork, he laughs again like it's some big joke, then says,
"I'm serious, how much?"
My mother stares at him blankly for a moment, and he continues,
"How much for the girls? I'd like both of them, but if you could only part with one, I could still make that work. I'll give you the money. Just name your price, and I can give them anything they want. Any candy they want."
He grins yet again and wipes his brow, looking down at us. My mother doesn't respond to him, just looks at us and growls, "Here, now." So we do as we were told, which was fine by us because we didn't want to be anywhere near this creepy man. The cashier was a teenage girl no older than 17, and she was just completely wide-eyed watching this conversation occur as she silently continues to scan our groceries. Once we were next to my mother, she then growls at the man. "If you so much as lay one fucking finger on my kids, I'll break it off and shove it down your throat," which were some pretty big words coming from my 4'11" mother. But the man's face darkens, and without even purchasing anything, he walks around the cash register and exits, but he doesn't get far. The entire front of the store is glass, so moments later we watch as he presses his face against the glass trying to see in, leaving a sweaty face print behind. Now, at this point, the cashier's alerting her manager and asking him to call the police. My mother immediately assures them that that's not necessary, and just asks the manager to walk us out to her car. We see no sign of the man as we unload our groceries and hop into the car. My mother quickly drives us home once we sit in the car for a few minutes, scanning for any signs that he might be waiting in a car or something. We eventually made it home safely, and nothing ever came of it. I don't know what happened to the man, but I truly hope he never convinced anyone to give him their kid. That's absolutely horrific to think about.
Last year, I was invited to a wedding in Oregon. I wasn't from there, and I decided when I went there I could stay a few extra days and make it into a little vacation. I was interested in exploring the area nearby, and I was able to find a really good deal on an Airbnb only 15 minutes away from the wedding venue. The wedding was on Saturday, and I arrived at the Airbnb on Thursday afternoon. It was a smaller looking house in a nice little neighborhood, and I had the whole thing to myself. The first day, I went to a nearby city and met up with another friend I knew who was in town for the wedding as well. I returned to the house that night sort of late and tired from the long day. I got into bed, turned on the TV, and fell asleep within probably 15 minutes. I woke up the next morning without an alarm, which felt great, and I got up and made some coffee. When I was drinking it, I took a step out into the front yard because it looked like a really nice day outside. After I did, I was on the front step, and I noticed there seemed to be some sort of note taped to the front door. I picked it up and read it, not sure of what it could be. The note said, quote, "I broke into your house last night. You should fix your locks." And then they had written a little winking face on it. I freaked out when I read this and immediately went back inside the house and started looking around. I was sure the front door had been locked, because I remembered unlocking it to go outside just a few minutes ago. There was only one other entrance to the house, which was the back door. I ran over to it and checked, but that too seemed to be locked. I then started searching up and down the entire house, and like I said, it wasn't a very big house, so it didn't take me too long to look everywhere. After searching all the rooms, closets, and even cabinets, I didn't see anyone or a trace of anyone either. I was creeped out, but after time, thought maybe it was some kind of prank by somebody who lived on the street, and knew that this house was rented by people a lot. There was no way to know for sure though. I've always been a really deep sleeper, plus the house didn't have a whole lot of furniture in it, so if somebody had been here, I probably wouldn't have known. I left the house shortly after that to go do more stuff in the nearby city and also see some local parks. I took all my valuable stuff with me just in case, and I also contacted the Airbnb owner about the note I received. I was hoping they would reply to me before I got back home, reassuring me that the locks were fine and it was probably just a prank. After another long day of trying local restaurants, visiting local parks, and other cool buildings, I once again returned to the house that night. When I looked, the Airbnb owner never replied to me, and I was a little bit scared to go to bed, but I was tired and was able to convince myself it was probably just a joke, seeing as though everything in the house seemed fine, and just as it was when I left it. Wedding was the next day, so I once again watched some TV and then drifted off to sleep at about 11:30. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm again, but this time I looked at the clock and saw that it was just after 6 a.m. I didn't need to wake up until 9 and was about to turn over and go back to bed, but just started feeling a little bit paranoid. I decided to get up and walk around the house to make sure everything was okay. As I left the bedroom and walked down the hall, I immediately noticed that the back door of the house was wide open. When I saw this, I wanted to get out of there immediately. I knew the back door had been closed and locked before I had went to bed. I ran into the bedroom, packed up everything I had in probably less than 5 minutes, and went to leave the house. As I was about to walk out the front door, I started to hear the closet door in the living room begin to open. I never turned around to look, and instead sprinted out of there to my car. I didn't see anybody exit the house, but I drove away and then contacted the owner of the house again, telling him what had happened. Then I contacted Airbnb customer support. For the rest of the trip, I stayed in a hotel. This story happened just last month. My wife and I were planning to take a little vacation just for the weekend. We found an Airbnb up in a really nice area with a lot of great land. The place was way up north, about 4 hours away. It was a house, sort of like a cabin, and was up on a hill with a really nice deck overlooking the massive amount of land nearby. The area was mostly woods, hills, and just land. We also really liked it because of how secluded it was from the rest of the houses. There weren't really any other buildings or houses in sight. In fact, most areas over there were just vacation homes or cabins. We drove up there early Friday morning and arrived to the property at about 10 a.m. When we got there, we had a great time just relaxing and enjoying the area. It didn't take long, though, before our trip took a turn for the worst. That night, as we were just sitting in the living room of the house watching a movie, all of a sudden we heard a knocking sound. I couldn't tell where it was coming from at first, but after pausing the movie and getting up, I could tell it was coming from one of the windows. I walked down a hallway to where the noise was coming from. As I got closer, I was able to locate the window, and then the knocking stopped. I reached the window where it was coming from, but I didn't see anything when I looked outside of it. However, I didn't have a good feeling about it, because the house was so secluded, and most parts of it were surrounded by trees and bushes. I knew anybody being around here at all would be suspicious. As I walked back to the living room, my wife asked me if I saw what was causing the knocking. Just as I was telling her about it, we then heard a loud pounding coming from the front door. It sounded as though somebody was trying to break the entire door down. I walked back over to the kitchen area to try and look out the window and see, but once again, when I got at an angle to actually see who was at the front door, the noises had stopped, and whoever was there was now gone. After this, we didn't hear any more noises for a while. I thought maybe whoever it was had now left. But about 30 minutes later, we heard the sound outside, just barely, of a man yelling. I couldn't tell what he was saying. In fact, I'm not sure if he was saying anything at all. We knew somebody was trying to mess with us, or get inside the house for some reason. We would hear noises or bangs against the house, but whenever we looked out the window, whoever was there somehow disappeared. This happened a couple of more times, and my wife and I were getting concerned. We didn't really feel comfortable going to bed with all this going on. It was getting late though, and I decided if we were in fact going to sleep there, I would go outside and take a look around. I went out the front door and took a walk all around the house, but saw nothing strange and didn't hear anything either. I hoped that meant whoever was there was now gone, and I went back inside. We decided we would go to bed, but if anything else happened at all, we would call the police immediately. Once we had both got to bed and turned out all the lights, almost right away, there was a sudden sound of glass breaking coming from the opposite end of the house. My wife grabbed her phone and started calling the police. I shut the door and locked it, and then started packing up all of our stuff. There was no chance I was going to continue to stay here with all of this going on. We didn't really hear any noises though as we waited for the police to arrive. It took them a while to reach the house with it being way out there, probably like 20 minutes. Thankfully, nobody tried to enter the bedroom we were in during that time. When the police arrived, my wife and I left the room with our bags packed. The police showed us a window in the living room of the house which had been broken, and there was some glass on the ground around it, but after searching the house, they didn't find anybody inside. I didn't feel safe though. After the police left, my wife and I did the same, and we checked into a hotel.